He sent the invitation to her office, not to her home, not through a mutual friend, not even through her assistant. He sent it directly to her office on the 14th floor of the Renwick Building on Michigan Avenue, addressed in embossed gold lettering to Adira Wells, founder and CEO. Luminary Tech Solutions, as if the formality of the address would soften what the gesture actually was. Adira held the envelope for a long time before she opened it. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling window that looked out over Lake Michigan, the water gray and wide in the early November morning, and she ran her thumb along the sealed edge the way she used to run her thumb along the spine of library books she borrowed as a girl in Englewood, carefully, as if the thing inside might be fragile, as if she owed it that much. She had not spoken to Dominic Hale in 14 months. The card inside was cream-colored, thick, printed with a serif font she recognized as expensive. Mr. Dominic Hale and Ms. Cassandra Forte request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration. The date was 3 weeks away. There was a handwritten note beneath the printed text in Dominic's slanted hand, the same handwriting she had watched sign incorporation papers and investor term sheets and the divorce settlement she had not contested. You built yourself something impressive, Adira. I hope you'll come celebrate with us. Bring whoever you'd like. She set the card down on her desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went to her next meeting. Her assistant, a young man named Brett who had been with her for 2 years and had learned not to ask unnecessary questions, noticed the envelope in the recycling bin beside her desk that afternoon. He did not mention it, but he also noticed, 2 days later, when Adira told him to RSVP yes. For the Hale wedding, he said. Yes. Should I arrange a +1? No, she said. But call Patrice at Sentinel Group and tell her I need 4 of her best people available on the 14th. Tell her I'll explain when I see her. Brett typed the note without looking up. Dress code is black tie. I know what black tie means, Brett? Of course. I'll have your usual stylist reach out. Adira was already looking at her screen again. Tell her I want something that makes me look like I own the room, because I probably do. The thing about Dominic Hale was that he had not always been the man who sent that kind of note. There had been a version of him, a younger version, a hungrier version, a version that ate cold pad thai at midnight over a laptop in a 1-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, who would have been ashamed of himself for writing it. Adira had met that version first. They were 26 when they met, both of them working at a mid-sized logistics firm in the West Loop that has since been acquired twice and no longer exists under its original name. She was in data systems. He was in client relations. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming before they understand what their charm is worth, freely, without calculation, with a warmth that felt like something real, because, at the time, it was. They dated for 8 months before he proposed. She said yes in the parking lot of a Jewel Osco on a Tuesday, because he hadn't been able to wait until the dinner he'd planned for Friday, and she had loved him for that. For the impatience of it. For the way he looked at her like the timing didn't matter. As long as the answer was yes. She said yes. They were married for 9 years. In the 3rd year of their marriage, Adira started Luminary Tech Solutions in the 2nd bedroom of their condo in Hyde Park. On a folding table she bought from a hardware store and a second-hand desktop she refurbished herself. She had a concept, a small amount of code she'd written nights and weekends, and a problem she believed she could solve. Small and mid-sized businesses were bleeding money on logistics software that was too complex, too expensive, and too badly supported to actually help them. She thought she could build something better. Dominic thought she was wasting her time. He didn't say it like that, not at first. He said it the way people say things when they are trying to be supportive but cannot quite manage it. Are you sure the market's there? Have you thought about the competition? What's the exit strategy? He asked the questions a venture capitalist would ask, except he was not a venture capitalist. He was her husband, and the questions did not come with capital, only with skepticism that she absorbed the way she had learned to absorb most things that could not be immediately solved, quietly and without stopping. She did not stop. By year 4 of their marriage, Luminary had 12 clients. By year 6, it had 400. By year 7, she hired her first VP of engineering, her first head of sales, her first chief of staff. By year 8, she was being written about in trade publications. By year 8.5, she was on the cover of a business magazine that she had read as a girl in the public library on Halsted Street, sitting on the floor in the technology section, because there were never enough chairs, reading about people who built things from nothing, and wondering if that was something that could ever happen to someone like her. It had happened to someone like her. It had happened to her. Dominic did not appear on that cover. He was not mentioned in the article. He had been, by that point, building his own career in commercial real estate, a career that had benefited, quietly and significantly, from Adira's growing network, from the introductions she made at industry dinners, from the investors she knew who had become investors, from the reputation she had built that some of his clients assumed, at first, extended to him. She had not calculated any of this. She had simply been his wife. She had introduced him to people because she loved him, and because she believed that love was, among other things, an act of consistent and unguarded generosity. She had been wrong about what he believed in return. The conversation that ended their marriage happened on a Sunday morning in October, 14 months before the cream-colored invitation arrived in her office. She remembered it the way she remembered other things that had cost her. Precisely, without sentimentality, with the clear-eyed accuracy of a woman who had trained herself to look directly at the things that hurt her rather than away from them. Dominic had told her he was unhappy. She had asked him to explain what he meant. He had explained, at some length, in the language of therapy and self-discovery, that people use when they want to say something unkind in a way that sounds evolved, that he felt invisible in their marriage, that her success had overshadowed everything, that he had become, in the minds of the people around them, Adira Wells's husband, and that this had done something to him he couldn't continue to carry. She had listened to all of it. Then she had asked, "Did you want me to be less successful?" He had said no. He had said it quickly, and with apparent conviction, as if the speed of the answer made it more true. She had looked at him for a long time. She was sitting at the kitchen table they had chosen together at a furniture store in Lincoln Park, the one with the scratch on the corner from the time they moved it to paint the kitchen and dropped it on the stairwell landing. She had looked at the scratch while he talked. She had thought about the painting, how they'd done it themselves over a weekend, how she had worn an old college sweatshirt, and he had gotten pale yellow paint in her hair and laughed about it, how they had ordered pizza and eaten it on the floor because the furniture was all pushed against the walls. She had thought, "We were different people then." She had said out loud, "I think you should tell me the rest." There was a rest. There was Cassandra Forte, who worked in Dominic's office and was 29 and did not have a company that cast a shadow over anything he was trying to build. Adira had heard the name before, in passing, without attaching significance to it. She attached significance to it now. She did not raise her voice. She did not throw anything. She stood up from the table, walked to the bedroom, and began making a list of things that would need to be organized. She was, at her core, a woman who responded to chaos by identifying what could be controlled and controlling. She could not control what Dominic had done. She could not control what Dominic had done. She could control what she did next. What she did next was hire the divorce a single court appearance without a single court appearance. What she did next after that was build. She had never stopped building. That was the thing people who had not been paying attention did not understand about Adira Wells. The marriage had been a chapter. The divorce had been the end of a chapter. She had turned the page. In the 14 months since the divorce was finalized, Luminary had expanded into 3 new markets. She had closed a Series D funding round that valued the company at figures that made journalists reach for superlatives. She had been appointed to the board of 2 organizations she had admired since she was young. She had moved into a condominium on the 53rd floor of a building on the lakefront, a home with windows that went floor to ceiling on 3 walls, where she stood some mornings with coffee and looked out at the water and felt something she could only describe as arrived. Not finished, never finished, but arrived. She had not gone looking for a reason to see Dominic Hale again. She had, in fact, been actively uninterested in reasons. She had moved through the months since the divorce the way she moved through most things, with her attention directed forward, toward the next problem, the next question, the next version of the thing she was trying to build. And then the invitation had arrived. Bring whoever you'd like. She had read that line twice. She had understood it for what it was. The quiet cruelty of a person who believes the person they've discarded is still, somewhere beneath their composure, in pain. The invitation was not a gesture of goodwill. It was a message. It said, "Look at what I have now. Look at what I'm celebrating. Look at what I have moved on to." It assumed she would receive this message as intended. It assumed, in other words, that she was still the woman who had sat at that kitchen table in Hyde Park and looked at a scratch on the corner while her marriage ended. It assumed that woman had not been replaced by someone who stood at a window on the 53rd floor and felt arrived. Dominic had always had trouble updating his picture of people once he had formed it. She had noticed this about him during their marriage and had found it manageable then. She found it clarifying now. She RSVP'd yes. The night before the wedding, her phone rang after 11. It was her oldest friend, a woman named Claudine, who had known Adira since they were 7 years old and shared a classroom at a school in Englewood where the windows didn't close properly in winter, and the teachers were overworked and underpaid and still showed up every morning like it mattered. "Tell me you're not actually going," Claudine said. "I'm going." Adira, Claudine. A pause. "Is this the part where you tell me you have a plan?" "I don't have a plan," Adira said. "I have a perspective. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" Adira looked out at the lake. It was dark, and the lights of the city lay across the water like scattered glass. "A plan assumes there's something I need to make happen. A perspective is just knowing where you stand when you walk into a room." Claudine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you still love him?" It was the kind of question only someone who had known you since you were 7 could ask directly. "No," Adira said. She said it without hesitation and without sadness, which was how she knew it was true. "I stopped loving him somewhere in year 8. I just didn't know it yet." "Then why are you going?" Adira set down her coffee. The city was quiet at this hour, the lake dark, the building still. "Because he sent that invitation thinking it would hurt me. And I'd like him to understand that he doesn't have that kind of access anymore." Another pause. Then Claudine said, "Okay, what are you wearing?" Adira smiled at the window. "Something that makes it clear I'm not there to grieve." The wedding was held at the Ashgrove Ballroom, a venue in the Gold Coast that Adira recognized from charity events she had attended as a donor. A restored Gilded Age building with a marble lobby and chandeliers that had been carefully maintained to suggest old money without apologizing for it. The kind of place that looked impressive to people who did not own things like it. She arrived 12 minutes after the ceremony was scheduled to begin. She had not arrived late by accident. She wore a dress the color of midnight, structured, floor-length, with a neckline that said she had arrived from somewhere important and would be leaving for somewhere equally important. Her jewelry was simple and significant. Her shoes were the kind that made a particular sound on marble floors, unhurried, deliberate, the sound of a woman who did not feel the need to rush. The 4 people from Sentinel Group's Executive Protection Division, 2 men and 2 women, each of them in dark professional attire, each of them carrying themselves with the contained alertness of people who were very good at their job, moved with her through the lobby and into the reception hall beyond. She had told Patrice, the director at Sentinel, that she did not expect any actual security concern at the event. Patrice had understood immediately. "You want presence," Patrice had said. "I want context," Adira had replied. "There's a difference." The room paused when she walked in. Not dramatically, not the way rooms pause in movies, with a sweep of silence and every head turning at once. It was subtler than that and more real. A ripple, a shift in attention, the way a room adjusts when something unexpected enters it, and the people inside have not yet decided what to make of what they're seeing. She heard it before she saw the specific faces, the small adjustments. The whisper passed from one person to the next like a temperature change. Is that Adira Wells? She recognized several people in the room. Former colleagues, mutual friends from the years of her marriage. Some of Dominic's business contacts who had, she now understood, become his contacts partly through her. She saw the recognition in their faces and the calculation that followed it. The rapid, quiet reassessment of the evening they had expected to have. She smiled, because she was genuinely glad to see some of them, and moved to a table near the windows. One of Dominic's groomsmen, a man named Fletcher, she had met at 3 different dinner parties during the marriage, and who had been, she recalled, pointedly condescending each time, approached her within 4 minutes. Adira, he said. He was trying to read her. She could see him doing it. Didn't expect you to actually come. Here I am, she said pleasantly. He looked at the Sentinel team, who were stationed at a respectful and visible distance. And you brought colleagues? I came from a business dinner, she said, which was partly true. She had taken a meeting at 6:30. They were already with me. She picked up the glass of water a server had just set at her table. Are you seated nearby? We should catch up. Fletcher did not seem to know what to do with this. He made an excuse and retreated. She watched him go and did not find it particularly satisfying, which told her something useful about herself. She had not come for satisfaction. She had come to correct a record that had been written incorrectly. Dominic saw her from across the room 20 minutes into the reception. She saw him see her. She had been, for a long time, someone who could read Dominic Hale across a distance. It was one of those intimate fluencies that marriages create and divorces cannot entirely undo. She saw the moment he registered her presence, the pause in his conversation, the involuntary recalibration. She saw him look at the Sentinel team. She saw him look at the dress. She saw him look at the table where 3 people she knew from the city's business community had joined her and were leaning in to talk with the warmth of people genuinely pleased to be in someone's company. She did not go to him. She had not come to go to him. He came to her, after an interval she could tell, had cost him something to wait. His new wife, Cassandra, was across the room speaking with a cluster of her own friends. Dominic wore a tuxedo and a watch that was new since the divorce and intended to communicate something. He arrived at her table with the specific expression of a man who has prepared for a conversation and is already discovering that the conversation is not going to be the one he prepared for. Adira, he said. She stood because the table had already stood to greet him, and it would have been strange not to. She was exactly his height in her shoes. She had always liked that. Dominic, congratulations. You came, he said. You invited me, she said. He smiled, but it was the wrong kind of smile, uncertain. I wasn't sure you would. I know, she said it simply, without emphasis, and let him understand it however he needed to. He looked at the Sentinel team again. You doing okay? Security situation? I'm doing extraordinarily well, she said. The team is part of a partnership with Sentinel Group. I sit on their advisory board. They were with me earlier this evening. She paused. It's been a good year. The people at her table were listening. She did not look at them. That's good, Dominic said. That's? Luminary's doing well. Luminary is doing very well. She looked at him steadily. The Series D closed in October. I think you may have seen the coverage. He had. She could tell by the way he did not answer. A man at her table, a real estate developer she had met 6 months ago through her board work, someone who had recently shifted a significant partnership away from Dominic's firm in her direction. Though she had not engineered this, reached forward to refill his glass and said, casually, to no one in particular, the Luminary expansion into the Southeast market has been extraordinary. I was telling Adira earlier that the infrastructure work they're doing is going to redefine how distribution logistics works in that region. Dominic looked at the man. The man was not paying attention to Dominic. He was talking to Adira. This was, Adira thought, the real answer to what Dominic had written in his note. He had written, "You built yourself something impressive," as if the building had been an act of spite, as if she had built it in response to him, in reaction to him, as a way of recovering from him. He had assumed himself to be the origin point of everything that came after. He was not the origin point. He was not even a data point. He was someone who had been present during some of the building and had chosen not to see it clearly, and now stood in a ballroom, 14 months later, discovering that the world had not organized itself around his assumptions. She had known, the moment she read his handwritten note, that this was what she needed him to understand. Not as a punishment, not as revenge, simply as a correction. A factual, observable correction. "It sounds like you've been busy," Dominic said. "I've always been busy," she said. "That didn't change." He nodded. There was something in his face she recognized and had not expected to feel anything about. It turned out she did not feel anything about it. She felt, instead, a mild and passing curiosity, the kind you feel when you encounter something you once thought was important, and find that you have simply moved past it, the way you move past a neighborhood you used to live in. Familiar, not charged, no longer yours. "I'm glad you came," he said. And she believed that he meant it. And she believed that his reasons for meaning it were complicated and not entirely comfortable for him. And she found that she did not need to understand those reasons any more precisely than that. "Take care of yourself, Dominic," she said. She said it the way you say something that is finished. She left the Ashgrove ballroom at 9:47, before the cake cutting, before the last dance, before the room reorganized itself into the specific warmth of a celebration winding down. She did not leave dramatically. She said goodbye to the people at her table, collected her things, nodded to the Sentinel team. In the lobby, the marble floors reflected the chandeliers in long fractured lines of gold. She walked through them unhurried, the sound of her shoes exactly what it had been on the way in, deliberate, even, belonging. On the way out, a woman she recognized from the city's Cultural Arts Board stopped her near the entrance, a glass of champagne in hand, and said, "Adira, I've been meaning to reach out. I heard you're advising on the Southside Digital Access Initiative." "Is that true?" "It is," Adira said. "I'd love to connect sometime this month. We're looking at a partnership model, and your name came up 3 times in our last meeting." Adira took out her phone and opened her calendar. "Wednesday works. I'll have Brett send you a time." The woman smiled. "Wonderful." Adira walked out into the November night. The city was cold and bright and moving, as it always was, indifferent to anyone's private reckoning, indifferent to the ballroom behind her, and what had happened in it and what had not happened in it. A car was waiting at the curb, headlights on, the driver already stepping out to open the door. She got in. She did not look back at the building. She had not needed to. Claudine texted at 9:51. "How'd it go?" She thought about it for a moment, watching the city move past the window, the lake somewhere to the east in the dark, always there, always wide. "Fine," she typed back. "More than fine. He sent that invitation, thinking I was still standing in a place he'd left me. I just needed him to see that I'd moved on." Claudine responded with a single word: "Good." Then, after a moment, was the dress incredible? Adira looked out at the lights on the water. She smiled. The dress, she typed, was exactly right. She set the phone down and watched the city for a while. The towers lit against the dark sky, the streets full of people moving through their own private reckonings, their own corrections, their own particular versions of the long, slow work of becoming who they were always going to be. She had started Luminary in a second bedroom on a folding table. She had done it without permission and without a guarantee, and without anyone in her immediate life who fully believed she could. She had done it through the years of her marriage and the year of her divorce and the 14 months that came after. And she would continue to do it through whatever came next, because that was not something anyone had given her, and not something anyone could take back. The car north along Lakeshore Drive. The lake was dark and the city was lit, and Adira Wells, 41 years old, founder and CEO of Luminary Tech Solutions, daughter of Englewood, was going home.